The other day, I watched a video about the early concept for the Audi e-tron GT. Now, this episode of Geek Therapy Radio isn't specifically about the Audi e-tron GT, but damn, that thing is so sexy it almost hurts to look at. I sure hope I can afford one by the time they're available on dealership lots, but a boy can dream. The thing is, watching that review of that prototype Audi e-tron GT made me ask myself a question. When can we actually expect EVs to become mainstream?
Yeah.
This is Geek Therapy Radio.
What are we waiting for?
And now your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger.
Now, I know the first thing many of you might have muttered to yourself during the intro is, I thought EVs were already mainstream. Depending on where you live, Teslas and other EVs aren't exactly rare. Anecdotally, here in Houston, a very large city, I mean, this is 610 right behind me, I see several Teslas every single day on my 15-minute commute. And that's a 15-minute commute just between the Med Center and the Galleria. So pretty much just 610 alone. That's no exaggeration, and there's 2 or 3 Teslas in our own parking garage here at iHeartMedia. Every day. If you live in a less densely populated area, I do realize that you might not even see 2 Teslas in a year. To get back to my point, despite seeing dozens of EVs per week here in Houston, you know, enough to notice the increase of EVs on the road every day, that is such a low percentage of vehicles that are EV that it's less than even a statistical margin of error. According to the Center for Solar Energy and Hydrogen Research, Baden-Württemberg, I probably butchered that German pronunciation. As of February 2018, there were 750,000 EVs in the United States. Now, for some perspective, in total, in 2018, there were 276.1 million vehicles registered altogether in the United States. For those playing at home, that means in 2018, electric vehicles accounted for 0.003% of the cars on the road here in the United States. So my question remains, when will electric vehicles become mainstream? So I guess for sake of argument in this episode, we're going to have to define, at least for our purposes here in this short amount of time, what mainstream is, because mainstream to me might not really be mainstream to you. Technically, you can say that Jason Momoa and Scarlett Johansson are mainstream. There's only one of each of them, and many, many people know exactly who they are, even though they're rare. But all of us can't exactly take them for a ride. And only now did I just realize how horrible that sounds. I meant like cars. You take cars for... Moving on. What I mean is, popularity takes a back seat to availability in this discussion of electric cars being mainstream. You must be able to purchase the vehicle, you know, personal finances permitting, and put it in your driveway. So this idea of what would be mainstream for electric vehicles is kind of hard to pin down. Some might say 100% ubiquity. That means EVs are just everywhere. There's no more internal combustion engines. That would be mainstream. Although for sake of this argument, that's not really realistic. To go back to my celebrity analogy, Jason Momoa and Scarlett Johansson are rare, yes, but anyone can see their movies. So let's use this metric for the sake of time in the scope of my argument here. ScarJo's opening day top-grossing movie was Avengers: Infinity War. Opening day, Infinity War grossed about $258 million. So let's just roughly assume $12 per ticket. I know that sounds like cheap to a lot of you or expensive to some of you, but let's say $12 per movie ticket. That's about 21 million people who saw Avengers: Infinity War on opening day, give or take. That's 16% of the United States population that saw Avengers: Infinity War opening day. 16%. Again, to take some liberty and speed this whole thing up, I'm going to round up that 16% to 20% for mainstream electric vehicles. So for electric vehicles to be mainstream, let's say that 20% of all the vehicles on the road in the United States should be electric vehicles. 1 in 5, roughly. Now remember that in 2018, over 276 million vehicles were registered in the United States. 20% of that 276 million would be 55 million. So we need 55 million vehicles in the United States to be considered mainstream. Again, just for this argument. Okay, so there are roughly 1 billion cars in the world today. And we know that 276 million of those are registered in the United States of America. So let's just assume that the United States has just over a quarter of all of the world's vehicles. The International Energy Agency estimates that by the year 2030, there will be 125 million electric vehicles on the road worldwide. So again, in this mental exercise, we can deduce that about a quarter of that 125 million EVs, about a quarter of them are going to be in the United States. Roughly a quarter of 125 million is roughly 31 million. So by 2030, the United States should, big time air quotes, should have about 31 million electric vehicles. Remember, currently in 2018, there's only 750,000 electric vehicles registered in the United States. So to go from 750,000 currently to 31 million is a massive, massive jump. Remember, 20% of all cars on the road, that's the magic number for mainstream EVs in the United States. So of the 276 million vehicles on the road today, 20% of them need to be EV to be considered mainstream. For this argument, that's about 55 million electric vehicles. So by 2030, we'll have 31 million of the 55 million needed to be mainstream, massive air quotes. So to extrapolate with the numbers we just discussed, that means in the United States, we're going to be getting about 3 million more electric vehicles per year. So to get us to the magic number 55 million that we need, that's 8 years beyond 2030. So by the time every fifth car on the road is an electric vehicle, we are looking at, again, massively roughly, just for the sake of this mental exercise, we're looking at almost 2040 by the time 1/5 of those vehicles, 20% of those vehicles are EVs. That's about 20 years from the recording of this episode of Geek Therapy Radio. I feel like I should make a massive, massive disclaimer here, even though it goes without saying. This was a very rough estimate, taking many liberties. Everybody listening to this or watching this on YouTube probably has a pretty good idea of that. We definitely played loose and fast with those numbers and made some assumptions along the way. But this is fine in my opinion. Estimating the precise date when electric vehicles become arbitrarily mainstream is shooting at a very wild, moving target. We're talking about the very effects of world history and other socioeconomic impacts that we will inevitably face along the way. So your guess as to when electric vehicles will become arbitrarily mainstream is as good as mine. But if we're talking about 20% of the cars on the road in the United States, the rough estimate here is about 2040. But even as I think about it, 2040 isn't that much far off than my estimation before doing all this research. 15, 20, 25 years maximum. That's been pretty much my ballpark for when electric vehicles will become just massively readily available. That is, tons of electric vehicles that are affordable and made available to the masses. Now, I think the biggest factor in all of this, like I mentioned in my previous video about the Audi e-tron SUV, that's here now, you can order it now, is the timeline in which major auto manufacturers start to put big skin in the game. Tesla, for example, has made major strides in pushing electric vehicles into the future. Tesla is effectively the working laboratory for EV innovation, and Tesla owners are the willing beta testers, spending their own money for the privilege of living on the cutting edge, even if just in their minds, leading us into the future in some way. Sorry to burst your bubble, bud, but Teslas sell really well, not because you're saving the planet, but because you think they're gonna get you laid. I'm sorry to be so crass, but it's 100% true. Nobody, and I mean nobody, would buy a Tesla if it looked like a dweeb mobile. Elon Musk knew that people were only going to buy a Tesla if it was sexy. In other words, sex sells. That's rule number one. Tesla made the electric vehicle sexy and desirable so we'd actually buy it. Because if Tesla owners' main concern was the environment, they'd be on their bikes. But that's not a bad thing. Capitalism, keeping up with the Joneses, sex appeal, all of these things have helped push electric vehicles into the future. Now it's time for the major players to take the torch. One manufacturer I see taking that torch is Volkswagen. Yes, Dieselgate Volkswagen. When everyone else dumped their Volkswagen stock, I bought in low. Very low, knowing full well that they would make good with EV and had the resources sitting around to make it happen after shutting down major diesel manufacturing assets currently just sitting there. Volkswagen had nowhere to go but up and are in prime position to make gargantuan strides in electric vehicle production, taking EVs from boutique to mainstream. Side note, don't for 1 second take that as investment advice. It is not. Now, the Volkswagen Audi group is investing billions of dollars into electric vehicle infrastructure right here in the United States. They're doing this to destroy range anxiety and make sure that electric vehicle owners from any manufacturer can crisscross the United States just as easily as they've been able to do for decades in their internal combustion vehicles. I love Tesla, but Tesla just doesn't have that kind of capital laying around to work with. So, I say all of that to say this. While it may be 2040 or whatever before electric vehicles become mainstream, depending on whatever your personal definition is of that, the early 2020s, basically 2019 forward, is going to be absolutely amazing. As I record this in late 2018, EVs are here now. You can buy one today from multiple manufacturers. It's just that on that path to mainstream, whatever that means for you, with each passing year, our choices in electric vehicles are going to increase. And remember all of that sex appeal and environmentalism stuff? That's the beauty of it all. Our green future isn't going to be ushered in through a drum circle, but through the giant gray machine, because nothing's black and white, giant gray machine of capitalism. I've always said that the world would make the greatest strides in environmentalism through the power of the dollar. That is, as soon as mankind figured out how to make money from it, only then would we see the fastest explosion of green energy and electric cars. Make it sexy so that we want it, then affordable so we can buy it. Going into the early 2020s, we're there. We are at the precipice. Mark my words, it may be 2040 or whatever by the time that the electric vehicle is mainstream, but we're going over the waterfall now in 2019. The next decade is going to be a deluge of advancements for electric cars and the entire renewable energy sector for that matter. In the history books, just as the Industrial Revolution can be pinpointed to the late 1800s, early 1900s, 2019, 2020 will be marked as the turning point, ushering in a new era of technical revolution. And most of us listening or watching this on YouTube have a front row seat in that is worth geeking out about. Take care, everybody. While technology marches on, don't forget to be good to each other, including yourself. You are worth it. Find your geek thing and embrace it.